Good evening, everyone. This meeting of the Coventry Town Council will now come to order at 6 p.m. Roll call. Ms. Ludwig?
Present.
Mrs. Shockley?
Here.
Mrs. Lima?
Here.
Mr. LeBlanc?
Here.
Mrs. Dixon here. May I have a motion to open executive session for the following at 6 p.m. Per Rhode Island General Law 42465A21, work session pertaining to anticipated collective bargaining with IBPO and Vincent Rigosta. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call. Ms. Ludwig?
Yes.
Mrs. Shockley?
Yes.
Mrs. Lima?
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mrs. Dixon, yes. 5 yeas, no nays. The motion passes. We are now in executive session. Let us go to the executive session room. Thank you. set? Okay. You say yes? Okay. Okay. We'll now resume back in public session. May I have a motion to adjourn from the executive session at 7:02?
I'll motion.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Roll call. Ms. Ludwig?
Yes.
Mrs. Shockley?
Yes.
Mrs. Lima?
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mrs. Dixon, 5 yeas, no nays. The motion passes. May I have a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session?
So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Roll call. Ms. Ludwig?
Yes.
Mrs. Shockley?
Yes.
Mrs. Lima?
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mrs. Dixon, yes. 5 yeas, no nays. The motion passes. Members of the public, the town council met for the following. Per Rhode Island General Law 42465A2, a work session pertaining to anticipated collective bargaining with IBPO and Vincent Regasta. A discussion took place. No votes were taken. So I now call to order the joint meeting of the town council, the school committee, and the Rhode Island legislators representing the town of Coventry. Welcome, school committee chairperson Kathy Patno, school committee members, Superintendent Levis, members of the Rhode Island delegation. We also will have a guest with us representing the League of Cities and Towns, Jordan Day, who is the interim executive director of the League of Cities and Towns. Roll call of the town council, Ms. Ludwig,
Yes.
Mrs. Shockley,
Yes.
Mrs. Lima,
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Dixon, yes. Chairperson Patno, please call to order your school committee and do a roll call.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to open the Coventry School Committee. I have, what's the time? 7:04. And can we have a roll call, please?
Catherine Patno,
Here.
Dave Florio. Here. Donna Colonian.
Here.
Thank you. So welcome members of the public, the town council, legal counsel, Nick Gorham, town manager Ben Marchant, members of the school committee, Superintendent Levis, Assistant Superintendent Coward. We also have Finance Director Howard Sands with us. Thank you for joining us, members of the Rhode Island delegation. I would like to ask each of you to introduce yourself. Tell us about your years in the legislature, your area of interest. We'd like to know a little bit more about the area of Coventry that you represent, the number of Coventry voters in your area, and perhaps you can briefly tell us about the legislative grants that you will be able to provide to Coventry organizations. So I'll start with Representative Chippendale.
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
Thank you for having us again this year. I represent District 40, which as it stands, at least until the first Tuesday of January next year, is everything west of Route 102, everything south of Route 118, up until just short of the river in Johnson's Pond area. I have been in the legislature since 2011. The number of constituents that I represent from Coventry right now is 2,180, which makes up 17.81% of my district. Although, as I'm sure you're all aware, redistricting has changed that dramatically. And you folks will have that information far sooner than we will, because your Board of Canvassers will actually make those adjustments for us. So that's as it stands today. Legislative grants. The only legislative grant request I got, and it fell within my personal area of acceptability, was from the Western Coventry Fire District. And I did submit that paperwork prior to the deadline last week. If I omitted anything from your questions, just let me know.
No, that's fine. And what was the amount of the grant for the Western Coventry Fire District? Do you recall?
This is one of those things where you don't want to guess somebody's age, because I want to say 2,000 is what was requested.
All right.
But I reserve the right to be wrong on that.
Thank you. If it's more, that's fine.
Okay.
We're happy for more. Thank you so much. Senator Raptakis?
District 33, which it's changing a little bit, would be representing Coventry and West Greenwich. portion of East Greenwich I did represent has been put back into East Greenwich, and the population of the district's probably about 28,000 people, with the majority being in Coventry. I would say about 80% in Coventry and about 20% in the town of West Greenwich. As far as, legislative grants, as being elected in the state senate for many, many years, we try to bring back as many dollars back to our community. Those are taxpayer dollars that were paid into the general fund and to the general fund. So basically, every year for the last maybe 12, 15 years, Coventry Senior Center has been receiving $5,000. Johnson's Pond, for the last 10 years, $5,000 for environmental issues. Lake Tyoke, $3,000. Breezy Lake, $2,000. Coventry Fire Department, Central Coventry Fire Department, $3,000, Hopkins Hill, $3,000, Western Coventry, $500, and Coventry Babe Ruth, $3,000. So it's going along to Public Safety, Coventry Police Department, also $2,000. So I try to make sure that money goes to public safety, to our seniors, our youth, and also to the environment. I think that's very, very important. As far as legislation, as you know, for many years, the last several years, been putting legislation that affects the Coventry sewer program, which I think is very, very important to many here in Coventry. And this year, environmental issues, the one big issue that's been talked about is the Johnson's Pond issue. So there's several bills that have been introduced regarding that aspect. And there's other, I've got probably quite a few bills, but I think those are the ones that do affect Coventry. I know voting, which is very important for the town of Coventry, trying to make it easier for the Board of Canvassers, several bills in that nature, and we can discuss that later if there's any questions on those bills. And that's about it. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so
Chair.
much. Senator Rogers?
How you doing? Thank you. A little bit about me. You said ask, but we are kind of our wheelhouse. Mine is municipal and public works. I'm actually a public work director in a neighborhood town of Foster. Percentage of Coventry is about 34% of my total district. I take the entire town of Situate. That's also another 35%. And I'm close on the numbers. Foster, I take that in entirety also. That's about 17% of my district, and the remaining 9 or 10% is West Greenwich. So grant-wise, I've got about $18,000 to $20,000 spread between all 4 towns, and primarily for public safety, fire departments, police. I'm a volunteer firefighter, EMT cardiac for 42 years now. What's that?
No, it's behind you.
So bills in the Senate, we got a couple I'm sure we'll be talking about later tonight. But other than that, this is my second term, and I'll be running for re-election for a third term coming up this coming election. So I got elected. I started January of 2019.
So Senator Rogers, thank you so much. And about how many Coventry residents do you actually represent?
I don't know what the number is. I'd be 34% of 28,000. So in that general area, 28,000 is the total district of a Senate seat.
Okay.
And I have about 35%. So whatever that equals to.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Representative Nardone?
Thank you. Yep, I represent District 28. I've been in the House since 2018 when I first got elected. My district goes as far west as 102 and as far east as Fairview Ave. Beyond that, north and south, it's shaped like a key, so I wouldn't want to venture into explaining how that works. As far as the legislative grants, I've taken about $5,500 in legislative grants. $1,500 was for the Freemasons, $2,000 for Johnson's Pond, and $2,000 for Breezy Lake. And I also have a request for the VW Post. So I'm just waiting for a number from them if they want me to submit a grant. And as far as how many constituents I represent, like Gordon, I don't know the exact number.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you very much.
Okay.
Representative Morgan is not here. Representative Roberts?
Yeah, Sherry Roberts, District 29, West Greenwich and Coventry. I don't know the exact number of constituents that I have, but I believe it's probably around 65%. And then I don't know what else you want to know. I've signed on some legislation with Rep. Nardone here to help Johnson's Pond. My main thing really is just trying to keep more tax dollars in the residents' pockets. So that's my main thing that I'm working on this year.
Have you been able to sponsor any legislative grants for any organization?
I haven't been asked for any money this year.
Okay. Okay, Representative Serper is not here. Representative Norrie.
Thank you. Tom Norrie, represent District 25, the eastern end of Coventry. So Fairview Avenue, where I live, to Black Rock, to Hill Street on the right side of the road, down Hill Street to Brown Street, to Hillside, and then just that small area on Fairview, and then I head into West Warwick. I represent, as of today, 2,196 active and inactive voters in the town of Coventry, which equates to about 15.7% of my overall district. Legislative grants that I have worked on in the past. So 2022, literacy volunteers at Kent County, $1,200. Anchor Paws Rescue in Coventry, $3,000, and that was split up between three representatives. One of the other representatives also represents Coventry. That's Representative Serpa. St. Vincent de Paul Society, thank you to Councilwoman Lima, who directed me in their direction that they were looking for something and didn't know where to go. So they recently received $1,500. 2021, the Alan Sean Feinstein Middle School Drama Club received $2,000. In 2021, I donated money along with a couple other representatives that I collected from, and we did $1,000 scholarship up at the high school as well for a visual arts senior who was graduating. There's more than just the legislative grants as far as putting back into the community. So if you'll allow me to go on. While at the awards night, I was very impressed with the quality of candidates. So since then, I personally, as a retired Coventry police officer, have given $500 towards a law enforcement scholarship or criminal justice scholarship to be in my name as a retired police officer for the 2022 graduate. In January, I helped facilitate Coventry High School students going and doing a cabaret at the Arctic Playhouse. From that, there is now a member of the Coventry High School staff who is now on a Rhode Island Arts Council board that is determining equity and budgeting for grants for arts throughout the state. So that will in fact benefit the town of Coventry eventually, because they're going to make recommendations on best practice on how to spend taxpayer dollars and what organizations should be getting those. So that's most recently. And then in 2019, Coventry Little League received a $3,000 grant, but unfortunately in 2020, they did not complete the necessary paperwork. So they're not eligible to receive, which they had applied in 2020 as well. I work a lot. I focus a lot on education. As far as my budget, as far as my issues go with legislation, I have two children that are students in the Coventry schools, one at the middle school and one in the high school, 6th grade, 9th grade, respectively. And again, a lot of my focus is on educational issues, mental health issues, and trying to do, again, as Representative Roberts, keeping the everything here in the community, working hard in the community. So did I answer all the questions? I cover everything. I'm a little long-winded, so.
No, you weren't long-winded. Thank you very much. We appreciate the detail that you provided. So it sounds as if organizations need to be proactive in reaching out to our senators and representatives to make requests for funding, that you're not going to go seeking out these people, but they need to be more proactive. And perhaps the organizations don't realize that.
And again, they do and they don't. So there's certain organizations that know every year to reapply and come and ask. So as we went last week to Be the Change in West Warwick, again, they service Coventry it's a food pantry. They service Coventry. So again, they've asked me for a grant 2 out of the last 3 years. So West Warwick Assistance Agency, another food pantry right around the corner, same situation. The last 3 years, they've requested grants. And again, I know they service people from Coventry as well. So again, with 85% of my district being in West Warwick, there are obviously more grants that go that way. And again, in the portion of Coventry that I represent, there's very few business or activities. So that's why St. Vincent de Paul was great for me to connect with in my district.
So to be clear, an organization would approach you and then there is a form that the organization fills out. Is it a standard form that all of you use, or?
House and Senate is different. So I don't want to speak to the Senate's practice, but they would approach me. Then yes, I would collect some information. Then they would get a form either mailed or emailed to them. Then they would complete that form with their request, explaining what they're going to do with the money. Mm-hmm. And then again, they have to be an approved 501c3 on actively registered with the IRS and up to date with all their filings in order for them to receive the opportunity of a grant.
Okay. And how does it work in the among the representatives? Senators. How does it work among the senators?
It's almost exactly the same way. An organization, well, let me take Hopkins Hill Fire Department for an example. Well, what they do is they request what they want to fund within the department, whether it might be visual night goggles for the firemen or air pack or whatever it might be. So again, they have to be a 501(c)(3). It has to be modified by the IRS. And usually we allow some flexibility with certain organizations like public safety. But when it comes to Johnson's Pond, it's for weed abatement. That $5,000 every year goes for weed abatement. Same thing with Breezy Lake and Lake Tioga. So basically we leave it up to the organization. But again, there's certain criteria they have to fulfill, and they have to prove the fact that they spent that money every year to what they requested to do so.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, Chairperson Patno, would you like to lead us in a discussion about the issues that we have on the agenda that you've submitted?
Sure. Again, welcome to our local delegation. I do have a question before I start on our issues about the legislative grants, because just kind of curious, does every rep and senator have the same amount of money they can give away? I know it's kind of a funny little sticky wicket up there that I hear about in the papers. So how, so for example, our PTAs, maybe some of our PTOs even, are all 501c3s. And yet, even when I was a PTA leader in this town, I never realized that I could get a legislative grant, for example, or apply for one. So just kind of curious as to how that sort of gets out there and is advertised to the 501c3s.
Well, it depends. Again, it's going to be up to the legislator, whether you're in the Senate and House, to make the request to look at the community, acclimate themselves with what's happening. If any requests come to that individual, the fairness, and you bring up a good question, the fairness should be that if we have 113 legislators, there should be, say, a pool of money and divided equally. That's the fair way. Mm-hmm. But as you and I know, that has not been historically or traditionally done that way. So basically, it's up to every state rep or senator to make a request and look at what the needs are amongst the community. So, for example, we can have a fire department for West Greenwich. We've been giving them one grant every year, and in the last couple of years, they did not fulfill to complete that application. So, again, maybe they didn't need that money anymore. We could shift that money to other areas. One year, I know we were giving money, about $8,000, to rebuild the Maple Cemetery, the fencing on Harkney Hill Road. Again, it depends. It's up to each individual, I think. But we haven't come to that stage where equality, I believe that every legislator should have equal amounts. We're 113 within the elected body. So that day hasn't come here. But I guess it's up to each state senator and state rep to seek out inside the community what the needs are. Sometimes you might have 30 requests, and what do? You try to balance out as many requests as you can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I can help answer that as well.
Yeah,
So 6 months ago, I resigned as the BlackRock treasurer of for the PTA.
Mhm.
So I advocated and taught my PTA how to correctly raise our own funds where we didn't need to go after legislative grants. And when I was there, we had slightly over $20,000 in the PTA coffers. But to answer your question about other PTAs, there are several or a few that are in this town that are not active. They haven't done their correct filings and they are out of date. And that is a problem for them, that they aren't able to actually go after legislative grants.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
If I may, I'm going to just keep rolling on this because we're on the good topic here. Yes, totally unfair. Absolutely. I think Lou described it quite well. However, it's important for everyone here to note, and it's a fairly esoteric topic, but the agency that controls the money for grants, JCLS, has just lost a lawsuit that has been in the works for 2 years.
Yeah. I read about it.
And that will enable rules to be created. One of the things we're going to be seeking to do is to take that $1.9 million, which is typically allocated for grants, and simply divide it by 113. So that would certainly afford definitely more equity, but it will afford more flexibility for the individual reps and senators to be more responsive to as many organizations in their community as possible. So I'm hopeful that that's where we'll be the next time we're all sitting around this table for a round table.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Representative Nardone?
Yeah, Kathy, you had asked like how you facilitate these. What you would do is you'd call your representative, and me being your representative, I'm a functionary. I would put in for the grant. It doesn't necessarily mean you would get the grant, but most of them are handed out. And back to what Mike was saying, yes, if you look at the numbers and how these grants are handed out, it's very unfair. Some of these reps get $40,000 worth of them. Some of them get $5,000. So yeah, that is a controversial issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chairperson Patno, we've just had one more member of the delegation enter. I'd like her to introduce herself.
Sure.
So Representative Morgan, we've asked everyone to introduce themselves. Tell us about the area of Coventry you represent, the number of voters in your area, and tell us about any legislative grants that you have been able to provide to Coventry organizations.
Yes, I am Representative Patricia Morgan. So let's see. I have the BlackRock area of Coventry. In this last redistricting, I actually got more of Coventry. So my district went to Naughty Oak Road, and now I'm on the other side. So I have a little bit more of Coventry than I've had in the past, and a little less of Warwick. As far as legislative grants, I honestly wish they would be abolished. How could you say when Speaker Mattiello was giving out $125,000 worth of legislative grants that the kids in Cranston who played in soccer or hockey were more deserving than the kids in West Warwick or Coventry? And yet that's what happened. There will always be patently unfair. This is taxpayer money that is being distributed or being given out to different favorites. And there are always going to be some that get more than others. So if it was up to me, I wouldn't do them at all, quite frankly. No one in Coventry has ever asked me for a legislative grant. I think that's good news. I think that means that all of your organizations are pretty healthy with their fundraising. They're able to do it on their own, which I'd like to commend them for. But if they do, certainly I will look at it. If it's, if it's a specific thing that they need, that they just can't find the money for, certainly I would put in a legislative grant for them.
Thank you so much. Okay, Chairperson Patno,
Yes.
in the People's Packet, you turn to pages 4 to 10. You'll see the bills that will be discussed by the school committee this evening.
So the school committee had three main things that we wanted to ask your opinions on. The first was the RIPEC release. Hopefully it was in your packet and you've had a chance previously to read it or have read it for for tonight's meeting. And so the primary thing about the RIPEC press release that we were encouraged by, and it's sort of like a perennial problem that we hear every year, every time. And it's the whole notion of trying to relieve the taxpayer from some of the school funding issues. Almost all of our funds come from the taxpayer as opposed from the state budget. So on the first page of the press release, on the bottom, it says Rhode Island should continue to increase the state share of elementary and secondary education funding to both decrease reliance on property tax revenues and increase equity in elementary and secondary education expenditures. Of course, the second part of that is, at the same time, policymakers should seek to slow the growth in total state and local expenditures for K through 12 and focus investments on improving student outcomes. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword there. So I guess I just would like your opinion on if you think there's any way that we could ever move more to what I think is a fairer way to fund schools, and that's by income tax as opposed to property tax. I think I've heard this ever since I've been elected on the school committee, that there have been hopes for that, and it never, ever comes true. So I don't know if anybody wants to start that discussion or say anything about it.
Yes, Ms. Patnode, I agree with exactly what you're saying. It always is every year that we're faced with this. Early in this onslaught of federal money, Michael DiBiase, who's the executive director of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, sat with some of my colleagues and I in our office and gave us the long form of this report. And he did delineate, and I can't recall the specifics between where you pointed out how they're saying, well, we got to cut here, but we also got to add. But his and their entire thrust has been on to using that money to solidify your infrastructure, not just the roads and to reinvest this one-time money rather than, and the executive director's been around in Rhode Island politics long enough to know how this usually works, rather than to create programs that would then require additional funding every year afterwards that could never be funded. That's how we got into the problem in the first place. If I were a gambling man, and I'm not, I would say that we probably won't take RIPEC's advice on that, although my personal preference would be exactly that. I particularly represent a district that has very little industry. There's nothing going on in Green besides the Summit Store and Cazellas. There's nothing but homeowners who support the base, and every child that moves in goes to the school at approximately 20 grand a head is directly coming out of the taxpayers in my district's base. So I wholeheartedly support this approach completely.
I'd like to just echo what Mike said, and I agree with him 100%. Property owners need tax relief. But being on the finance committee 1 year, I'm learning a lot. And whatever goes in that general fund just becomes a feeding frenzy for everybody. That's the way I see it. So how you get to where you want to be it would be very difficult, and I wouldn't know where to begin myself. But to reiterate, I agree exactly what you're saying. To get, like I say, the property owners some kind of relief and get the state to hand over more share of the revenues, I'd be all for, but how do we facilitate that? That's a whole different story.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that before we move on? Anything from town council members? Any questions, comments? No?
Members of the council, any questions or concerns?
Okay, and so the second issue we want to bring up is a Senate bill, and it is in fact introduced by Senator Raptakis, one of our own representatives. And on the first page of that bill, on the bottom of the page, there's wording that's added to that bill. And this is basically relating to the school funding formula. And so the added information, which is, again, was something that most LEAs have been complaining about since the funding formula first went into being, especially now that there are not so many winners and losers. So for the first 7 years, a lot of districts got more money than some other districts. And so there were losers and winners in that first 7 years scenario. And then after that, now we're back sort of to this, okay, this is, they figure out the formula and you get your aid. And the swing on some LEAs, the local education districts, is so big that it's so difficult to try to figure out how you're going to, what your budget is, what your revenue stream from the state will be. When you, like Coventry, we've had situations where we've been cut, $1 million. Other times, less, sometimes a little more. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme to reason, except that part of the funding formula includes that piece that, free and reduced lunch. And so if your numbers go down or your properties go up, then the funding formula seems to indicate that you have a greater share on the local level. So we had asked that we understand that, and we understand that, some towns, have a bit of luck. And so, their properties go up, and maybe their free and reduced lunch population might go up. So they're going to get more money than what they got the year before, because that's figured out every single year. So I think, and I'd like you to speak to this, Senator Raptakis, but I think basically the idea is to not let those swings get out of hand.
Right.
So, and we'd love that to be part of this bill.
Sure. Madam Chair, also my colleague, Senator Rogers, is a second co-sponsor. So two of the Coventry state senators have sponsored this bill with many, many others, Elaine Morgan from West Greenwich. But the important issue about this bill is the surprise issue. I've been putting this bill in for many, many years. So when you're facilitating your budget every year, you know that you received, say, $23 million from the state last year. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure in back of your mind, you're still going to get that $23 million, regardless if there's less student population, whatever the case might be. And it goes back to your first part of your introduction, that the state should take more responsibility. So if you know the minimum is going to be $23 million, the state's going to provide that $23 million in the following year. If there's an increase, you'll get that bonus. But that's the path that this legislation is leading to. It makes it a lot easier. Every year, you don't get the surprises. Well, Coventry's budget's going to be finalized, as it usually does, the end of June. And then there'll be a surprise amendment or whatever. There might be a reduction in what you're receiving. So whole harmless, I think, is very important. The concept is very, very important to not just Coventry, for all the communities. But it leads that path that you're going to get X amount of dollars permanently. And it puts the burden more probably back on the state, that you should be providing more dollars to the community and not giving less. I think this year, because of one of the provisions, I think in the budget, Coventry, I believe, was supposed to lose $500,000. But because of this provision, even though this bill has not become acted into law, it's part of the budget, it saved you at least $500,000. So that's a good bonus. So again, it's almost identical to what we're discussing, that it's in the budget. So I hope it becomes permanent. Hopefully that the General Assembly takes this concept and use as a permanent basis, so we don't have these surprises or headaches at the end of the budget year, what amount of money is coming from the state. I wish we would finalize our budget a lot earlier, not June 30th. That a lot of cities and towns already have voted on their budgets, and then not knowing what the unknown factor is going to be.
I'm just wondering if there's a way to do a smoothing where you take a 3 or 4 year average and keep that rolling. I tend to not like maintenance of effort so much. I think you all know, again, I'll go to Warwick. They lost 40% of their student body. So if they were on maintenance of effort, they'd be getting a whole lot more per student. But there might be a way to do some kind of a smoothing average, like we do in the pension plan, so that there's not those wild swings. I get it. Trying to make up $1 million
is really hard. And I think I do think there have been some discussions about that smoothing and looking at the last 3 years or because we understand obviously that things change in every district every year. But to have those big swings are almost an
it's crushing
impossibility.
to anybody who's trying to put a budget together, but to put a maintenance of effort in when student population, like you say, student population changes, and yours may always be growing, but somebody else's might be declining. So I'm not really so much in favor of maintenance of effort, but I would support a smoothing so that you don't have those wild, unexpected swings that I get it. Hard to put a budget together when you lose $1 million all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'd like to add a little bit, the way things happen in the Senate and also on the House side. They have task force on housing, education. I don't know if you guys remember last year, the state put together a education's task force to go through all the issues of the state, and a bunch of the superintendents called in and a array of problems were addressed. So we took the general public's information in. An important thing to note when these task force are done and they present bills, it's through a long period of time and a lot of work. And 99 to 100% of the time, the bills that come out of that, when they hit the floor, they're going to pass. They've been vetted. Whereas, as I did co-sign on Mr. Senator Raptakis's bill, it's put in every year. It's just presented. Bills are going all the time. The ones that come through the task force have already, already got traction and more than likely are going to pass. Like I mentioned earlier in the meeting, I come from municipal, so it's in my wheelhouse. So that was one of the most important things that I brought to the table. There were other things that came that some may not be palatable to the town of Coventry, but they're going to be palatable in other areas like Pawtucket and Newport. English learning language is an issue in other parts of the state. So there were all these issues that were brought. And this one specific is a bill, the funding formula bill is Bill 2042. It's already in, and I pretty well feel very comfortable that that will pass. And this bill isn't level funding, but the bill would not allow any community in the state to lose more than 1% of the funding from the previous year. So that is something you can work with that will definitely probably pass. And that was collectively, we've had swings in my town when I was on the council 4 or 5%. So it was hard to budget for. So we could put bills in and look good, and they may never get passed. But at the end of the day, it doesn't solve a problem. I think this one will pass. It was vetted. It doesn't put us at level funding, but I think it allows us to understand the most you can be cut at 1%. So it does add continuity to being allowed to, as Patricia Morgan said, Rep. Morgan, something you can work with. So if anything comes out of this meeting tonight, I think it's important that we know that that bill is probably going to pass in this session. So I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you. Rep. Naray.
So, obviously, these are Senate bills that I don't know if there's a House sponsor or there's a companion bill, so I haven't seen them in the House. So this year I put in, after lengthy conversations with the former finance director, Sarah Mangiarelli, and Craig Levis, the superintendent, I put in 7547, which is a House bill, to force RIDE to come up with a metric to address that 40%. So just based on an email from back in November of 2020 from Sarah, current funding formula includes student success factors. We discussed the additional 40%, right? The funding, and with the USDA expanded free lunch for all students. So since then, I've been talking to RIDE, trying to come up with a way. So House Bill 7547 is what I put in this year to try to address that with House Finance, to try to come up with a way to force RIDE to have a metric to better figure that 40%, knowing that the school 40%. I know I filled out funding my form for and already. So again, I know how important this is, and so that's why I put this in as well. So again, I'd love to see if we get a companion bill on our side on these bills. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Rep. Anyone else from the delegation? Yeah. Sure.
I think one of the in our, excuse me, in our discussions with the school committee was a lot of times Rhode Island has looked at Massachusetts and adopted some of Massachusetts legislation like Title 16 that shifted some of the responsibilities from the school committee to building principals, administration, some oversight. I know in Massachusetts, they have like $7.1 billion, I think is the budget, but like $6 billion of that goes to cities and towns for education. So every state rep, every state senator, that's their bucket, right? That's their wheelhouse, really advocating for that. And I think their formula is pretty, they have, since 2000, since ed reform came about, they've only reduced they call it the foundation budget, but it's only been reduced once when the dot-coms busted in 2004. But even then, I think that was part of our conversation about, we look at Massachusetts, but has the legislature, have you worked with Massachusetts around their funding formula, how that's been implemented? They have, they don't call it maintenance of effort, but it basically is that for the foundation level, then the cities and towns contribute based on the formula. And even if it's level funded, they guarantee that every district will get, I think it's $30 per additional student. So your budget goes up a little bit, so we would get another, I don't know, 12,000 or, I don't know how much money that would be. But I think that was part of our conversation is Massachusetts, granted, it's a much different state and revenues are different, but they seem to have a track record of this formula, this process has worked. And I don't know, has the legislator specifically discussed that with Massachusetts, or is, because I know we pick and choose kind of some of the legislation that's been implemented. So I think that was our conversation.
Yeah,
and especially with with the state aid, more state funding in Massachusetts. Actually, it's closer to like 45% in Massachusetts. So thank you.
So, Mr. Levis, I'm not sure if, I don't think that was discussed in the funding formula task force. And you're right, we do compare ourselves a lot to Massachusetts, and we'll use them as a benchmark to try to achieve whatever we're trying to achieve. On this particular issue, though, I would think it would be exceptionally difficult to try to emulate what they're doing, because everything underneath the foundation that build up to the point where you create a funding fund is so different. I mean, they have county governments. They do things so differently in Massachusetts on so many different levels. And I don't even know what their funding formula looks like. So I think that would to try to emulate Massachusetts on something like this would be a complete reinvention of the wheel. Whereas we have said we want to emulate their scores or how well their students are doing, which I still think is shooting for mediocrity. But we'll use our neighbors for that. But in this case, I don't think that would even have been feasible. It's just so complicated where we are. And I think a lot of the issues that are on our calendar for this evening to be discussed are almost mooted by the new funding formula bill, because I don't know what's in it. Even the senator who was on the committee, we don't know what the final form is going to actually be after it's amended. It may moot a lot of these issues on here, I think. Hopefully for the better, hopefully to make your job easier.
Thank you. I do have one final thing about the funding formula that I've always found hard to explain to either the town council or our constituents. And that is when the formula gets put together, whatever it is, and your community demographics are looked at, like, have your properties gone up? Has, people's income gone up? The reason why sometimes we lose aid from the funding is not so much because our free and reduced population has gone down so dramatically. Sometimes it's just because wealthier people have moved into Coventry. And so the average or the medium income is a lot higher than people even imagine. And so what I think is missing from the funding formula is what the local share should be, because I don't really even think people get that. They're just thinking, like, on the town council side, they're trying to keep taxes down. So they're saying, well, we couldn't possibly, go to 4% or whatever the issues are. We all know them. but no one stands up and says, well, the reason why we have lost money from the formula is because, quite honestly, the taxpayers in Coventry have changed. The demographics have changed. We do have some other pockets that are, new developments, for example, with higher income people. And so no one ever considers that as the reason why, because I don't even know what it is, because you just get the number, this is what your rate is. So it really would be helpful if the legislator on the GA came up with, okay, so this is what your funding is for the year. And I don't know if your tax force looked at this, but this is what the local share should be. You may choose not to fund it, but at least the community knows what the local share should be compared to what West Warwick's local share should be or what Warwick's local share should be, because that's never really indicated when you get the sheet. It's just the numbers. This is what you're going to get. So I think that would be really helpful for anyone trying to make those decisions about how much taxes will go up or not.
The only thing I can add that opened my eyes as to the funding formula, what weighs in the most. There are many things that are calculated in, but the single most one that makes the most effect is, of all the things that are calculated in, one is 40% of the arbitrator that dictates what your funding formula is going to come out. And that's the free and reduced lunch program. It's 40% weighted to how that formula is formulated. So that's almost half of it right there. So to change that, again, we all know most of the power is held. There are 8 senators in the state of in the city of Providence. There's only 2 for Coventry. So, and unfortunately, that 40% weighs more in their favor than ours. So it's the nature of the beast. To change that would be very difficult, because it would be changing where the money would go, who has the most power in the state with representation. It's based on population.
I know it's indicative of poverty, but it doesn't tell the whole story.
No, it doesn't. I'm just trying to relate that formula is weighted by 40% of the free and reduced lunch program.
No.
Is how that is the major component of that. And to try and change that is the issue.
No, I'm not even saying that, but I mean, if I were to ask the town council, when we get whatever our allocation will be, and I say to the town council, what do you think if there is a worth of every student, correct? How much that is, so every student, there's a limited base amount or whatever. So if I asked the town council, I wouldn't be able to tell them, hey, by the way, this is Coventry share per the state formula. I have no idea what Coventry share is.
And that is broken out in 2 different, we use a number of 20,000 per student, but there's, and it's broken down into 2 types of, like, for example, pension and stuff is a part of that. So once they break that out, the funding formula is based on that first part, eliminating other parts that are town controlled. So what was the word they used for it? And I realized when I went through that is, I don't want to pick on another town, but the city of Woonsocket was actually using that money in their funding to cover their pensions, which is basically, you couldn't do that because it wasn't, I forget the word they used that separated the 2. And Woonsocket was actually using it for something they couldn't have. So that was also addressed, where it would penalize communities that would use it for using it where they shouldn't. Because it wasn't meant for that. So that is part of the problem also. And again, there's so many dynamics of it. It was a lot to take in, especially when you get put on. We have very few Republicans in the Senate, and each task force is required bipartisanship. To be covered. So it's a lot to absorb. And I know certain things stuck in my mind, and that 40% is one, and different communities have different problems. Communities you wouldn't, but then when they explain Newport, English language is a real issue.
Big, yeah.
Because of the service community that's tied to that. When Socket, the most involved with ECYF, so they have a transportation issue. But funding, and it wasn't no fault of their own because every had to be transported to the school of which they were in. So CYF placed them. It's not the fault of the community, but all
Hi, everyone. It appears that the Town Council of Coventry has lost access to their internet. They're working on getting back online, and they're going to let us know when they're available. Just please hang on. Oh, there they are.
I don't see them well.
I know, but it was like too much.
Hi, everyone. I was just telling the
Sure,
folks at
mine's
home
1
what was
minute.
going on.
1 minute.
Yeah.
4 or 5 minutes.
Mine, some of them might have been longer than others, and some have been really boring.
Kids don't care. They don't want to hear us.
Yeah, they don't want to go. They want to do their own thing. I'm gonna go grab something or other. I don't know what.
I wonder when they're from.
That make you really piggy?
No.
Yeah, you take what you get, I guess. No, the sandwich is technically big.
Yeah, mustard over everything now.
Yeah, maybe I'll get a chicken wrap too. Would that be really G in the hog?
I think so.
I think I'm gonna get the chicken salad. You know, I could have a salad.
No, I'm good.
I swear to God, my knee is starting to, like, I'm feeling it's 12 years out, I'm 12 years out. I never had like things before. I'm trying to get things now.
They were unable to report
How long
results
are you good for?
for the composition of students.
Like, you know what I mean?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now back on public session, so we will continue our session. Chairperson Patno, continued discussion. I'm sorry, we interrupted you speaking.
That's absolutely fine, you know?
Yeah.
These kind of things happen. So my final thing was, I started to talk about was the Education Recovery and Strengthening Plan. And there were some issues that they came up with. There's a lot of them. So I was just wondering if, before I go down the whole list, some of them sort of speak to the funding formula, actually, and fully funding the student success rate, the high cost of special education, fully funding English language learners. And here's something that always I never even knew until I realized that we were one of the only states that maybe did this. The pension costs, you know, that are basically borne by the individual communities in Massachusetts. I think the state pays for the teacher pensions. So there's no cost that gets borne by the individual communities. I think in Connecticut, the same thing happens. And in our state, originally, the ratio was 60% from the state, 40% from the locals, and it got switched during a bad downturn, and it never went back. So, you know, the local communities are funding those pensions for the teachers in the state pension system in much higher rate than other states that surround us. And so that's a big hurt, because we have to put a lot of our the funds that we collect from the town and the state goes to our pension obligations. So I don't know if there was any thought from any of you as to if any of these issues you could get behind, or if all of them just kind of curious because obviously as a school committee, we would love to see all of this go into effect, but it's going to cost a bit of money. So any comments, thoughts?
I'll address the redesign the vision services. So I'm on RIVEST right now on the committee.
Yep.
And we're working on trying to redesign that program and kind of configure the business model, so to speak, right, of how we're going to fund that program. But Coventry doesn't utilize the program, from my understanding. So we have we pay our own independent, so we don't utilize the program. So that's really not an issue for us. But again, it's something that Craig and I have talked about, and Mr. Levis and I have talked about, and we really should be utilizing the state's program once we get it, where it needs to be. So I can address that because I know I'm working on that presently.
How about the 300 million for the school bond issue? How do you folks feel about that? Would you support that? I think it's been cut maybe. I think I recently read it's been cut to 250 million, but I'm not sure. The original thought was 300, but.
I think it is 250. It has been lowered to 250. Generally speaking, if there is a gatekeeper, which in this case would be the taxpayers to vote on the bond, I would be in favor of it. But if it's just a straight out, let's throw money around without the constraints, then I wouldn't be inclined to support that. A lot of districts that, a lot of the districts that we've heard from, they struggle each year just trying to keep their buildings warm, dry, and safe for the students. And that takes a lot of their budget. Every year, I don't have to tell you, contractual obligations drive your budgeting process. Yeah, I think the state should be responsible for that, but we have to achieve equity. Some, certain pension funds are funded better than others. I mean, there's so many complexities to that part of it, but I think this is pie in the sky. I don't like that we're trying to increasing the student success factor to 45%. Well, wow, less than half of our kids are going to be successful. That's a great goal. I mean, just on its face, it's almost laughable. We shouldn't be shooting for mediocrity. We should be shooting for far greater than 45%. Special education clearly is something that's been a tough issue for schools to deal with. It's very expensive, but it's also critical. The same thing with English language learners. We have to do that, especially as our population continues to increase in the number of folks who are not proficient with English. So these things will require money, but we have to fix. You can't keep throwing money into a system that's fundamentally broken, or else you're just going to keep losing. You're not going to have success. You're going to keep losing your money. We've seen the Johns Hopkins report really highlight the failures in one particular school system in our state. And that was in 2019. Granted, there was a, 2-year interruption in the world, but literally no progress has been made to solve the fundamental issues that put Providence, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say their name, in the jackpot that they're in. So if you don't fix the system and you keep throwing money at it, you should not expect different results. Reform is good. I support reform. If this comes with reform that would add oversight and more control to the local, yeah, sure, I could support those initiatives.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
My issue where I would want to see a great support is the shift of the cost of the teacher's pension back to the state, because historically it was 60%.
Yeah.
I think it should go back up to 60% if we can find a funding mechanism, a dedicated funding stream, because what's happening, you can take that $6.2 million that it's going to cost you in, I believe, the FY 2023 budget and use it for infrastructure back into the town. If I recall, back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, I think, again, the cost was probably 60-40, but I think you had a lot more money to use for infrastructure, repairing of roofs, or whatever the case might be. So I think that's probably a lot better than a $250 million bond that the voters are going to vote on statewide. Is see if the state can, if we can gradually go back to that 60%, but the money that you're going to save, you're going to have to put back into infrastructure of your school buildings. I think that's the way to go, where you're going to resolve two problems, your pension issues and also your infrastructure issues. The hard answer is a hard question. Try to find an answer is, how do we go back slowly from 40 back to 60? Again, we'd have to find out where there'd be a dedicated funding stream. And that's probably the biggest question right there. Like we started this evening, the discussion of shifting more state aid and then reducing the property tax burden. So that's probably, I'd rather favor that concept right there, because you're resolving two problems at once. So.
I think if you read that whole paragraph, the plan is for it to increase like
over 10 years,
yep. 2%.
Slowly.
So I think that may be more doable. Obviously, you can't just switch right away. And the thing about the bond issue, I think that's in some ways, if the citizens of the state, I think they would in fact vote for it again. And there is oversight built into that, because it sort of has forced, they use the Massachusetts model, quite honestly. Mr. Magaziner did a lot of research on this. And so it's not just a giveaway. You have to, that's what the whole maintenance requirement now is, so that we're keeping up our buildings. We're kind of forced to do it because, unfortunately, money has been tight, obviously, over the years, and people that's what they cut. It's not just municipalities, it's some, private institutions, colleges, universities. They all have had structural problems with their infrastructure because other things take priority. And if they can hide fixing some of the things that really need fixing, that's the thing that they cut. Obviously, here in Coventry, we've done it year after year after year. There's been no capital investment. There just has never been an ability to kind of just even start a fund, which is short-sighted, obviously, because ultimately it's going to the Jacobs report shows the need across the state for infrastructure help in schools. It's just not, it's every single town. I mean, even some of our wealthier towns have, taken advantage of this and gone forward with, a bond initiative and gotten some, and their housing aid response coming back is a lot lower than even Coventry's. But I do think it's something that Massachusetts has done. And I think I like both of those things, the pension thing and the support of the bond, quite honestly, because I think it was successful this last go around. And so we are running out of funds, and the need is still huge. And I really do think that Mr. Magaziner, originally when he proposed this all, it was like the first step that we would have to continue to maybe bond for the future of this state, for their buildings, for schools. It'd be great if we could say that the $250 million made all of our infrastructure across the state great. But as you well know, there's probably many, many schools that are in dire need.
And that 250 is not enough. I think if you were going to,
oh God, no,
you're looking at
exactly.
probably $5 billion.
Exactly.
If that's,
So.
Look at Providence, look at Pawtucket, look at Central Falls. I mean, they'll eat probably the chunk of that $250 million bond. And I'm not sure how much is going to be left for Coventry, and why would the voters in Coventry vote for it if they're going to get probably a fraction of that money?
Well,
So that's the other
they
issue
voted for
too.
the 300. I mean, the first one. So I can't speak for the citizens of the state, but I do believe that it's easier sometimes to do a bond initiative across the state than in your own little local town, as has been shown right here in Coventry. This past school building committee failed at coming forward with a proposal that was palatable to the town council. So I'm just saying that I would support both, and I would hope that the delegation would support both of those issues. One, trying to, like you say, help with the pension costs, especially it's like, why Rhode Island? Why are we the only one in the surrounding areas in such a tough shape as far as trying to fund our pension? I don't know.
Question.
Sure.
My understanding was when we did the pension reform.
Yep.
Oh, excuse me. My understanding when we did the pension reform about a decade ago was that the contribution
was 24% of payroll. Has that changed?
I
I
think
mean, in other words, what every municipality has to give for every employee is 24% of payroll. So has your payroll gone up? I mean, I understand that when Treasurer Magaziner lowered the rate of return, he lowered it from 7.5% to 7%. Everybody had to pay a little bit more. But how, I mean, is it pretty stable? It's 24% of payroll is what every municipality is expected to give to the pension plan. Has that changed?
I'm not sure that's the issue. I think the issue more is like how much the state share is. So if maybe you can answer that, Harold. I'm not an expert on this.
I believe that the state will check it out, and every town has an arc that they have to meet their contribution every single year, and it's based on what the treasurer gets on his returns and how your town is, and how many years it's going to take you to meet it. So it changes every single year with an arc dictated by the state, I believe.
But the contribution was pegged at about 24% of payroll, which is still a lot,
It's still a
right? I
lot.
mean, I
Yes,
get
exactly.
it. It's still an awful lot.
Yeah. And it's the employees put in as well.
Sure.
So, I mean, it is their pension plan.
And it increases every year.
Yeah.
The amount that we have to put in increases every year. Could be 2-3% previous year, still in the 25%.
Okay. And that might be dependent on this.
So that could be fine.
We all forget that.
So yeah, every year it goes up, so that we don't know what the percentage is going to be until we actually are given that. That could be a 4 or 5% increase of what we paid the year before.
And that's based on the performance
Correct.
of the fund. Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Are we ready to move on?
Yeah. If I could, again, I know it's a lot of it.
Senator Rogers?
Thank you. Just a little bit this is a workshop to try and make things better. It includes us, it includes you on the town side too. One thing I found that Coventry did things a little bit different and we talk about it all the time. Your capital improvement plan. The state had an issue with not repairing our schools, so they kind of stepped in and they mandated 3% over a period of time that it has to be put in school budgets for capital improvements. And they did that because things like that were being cut. And a lot of times there was battles between town councils and school committees because councils would go after any excess money in the school committee. And it got dictated to be that. And now this 3% set aside was mandated by the state. And I'll get into it later. We're having the same problems with our maintenance of our roads and bridges. But I know other communities, and the one that I managed had a very important thing that helped with the capital improvement. I don't think Coventry has it, but it might be prudent to slowly, just like they did Piva Weed, start with a cap on bringing it down to 4% every year they drop down. Capital improvement plans should be in every town for the little things like a roof or repairs, the things that you don't want to bond out. When you bond out, you want to bond out senior centers, police departments, fire department, building structures like that. That's what you want to bond for. Every municipality should have a capital improvement plan for the things you don't want to bond out. You don't want to finance a roof replacement or a furnace replacement. So what I would recommend is, and I fought in my town, we have a 2% transfer. It's built into the budget. So whatever our budget is, it's 2% transferred in over to the capital. And then when planning stages go, it gets meted out and controlled for the little things. What I believe Coventry might want to look into is setting that on the same path like they did with Piva Weed, but in reverse, starting with a 0.25% a year or 0.5% a year, built into the increase of the budget to be set aside until you reach a point. I would recommend 4% because I know with Forster, we've been at 2% for so many years. Things have outpaced the price. A fire truck 50 years ago was X. And that 2% now has fallen behind. And it's a tough sell to explain this to people that needs to go to 4%. But one way of doing it is implementing it in small steps over 5 or 10 years to get to 4%. So you have a capital plan that will fix the little things that need to be fixed on a capital project. Kind of like what was mandated on state level for the school. Should also have that on a town level. So just my recommendations back on municipal plans. So thanks.
Okay. Mrs. Patno?
I think we're good.
Okay, excellent.
Actually, can I just comment?
Absolutely.
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Shockley?
Really appreciate everyone being here tonight and just kind of speaking to that 3%, which I think is a great idea, mandating that a certain percentage of the budget goes towards capital. The problem is when you weren't doing it, you're now taking blood from a stone once again. So any sort of mandate the state makes, in the same way you're all asking, anything we try to put forward, we'd like to fund it. In the other direction, if you're going to mandate the towns or schools do something, explain how the funding process works for that. Because like I said, the idea is great. The actually putting that idea into action is where we have a lot of trouble, especially in a town where our budget is voted on by the people who are taxpayers every year. So we can't just say, this is what we need, and this is where we need to get to, because we don't know that the constituents of our town are going to approve that budget. So that 5-year plan, 3-year plan, those are very hard to make just based on the way our town decides on our budget every year. So just something to think about from our end, the things we ask for, you're trying to figure out how to fund them. If the things that you mandate could also be with a funding formula of some sort, that would definitely help us to make an annual budget. So thank you.
My point was on the small capital projects, you're financing and paying interest on them when they really, most people don't go to the bank and finance a roof. So,
your point is very well. I appreciate your point. I think you're right.
and again, it's something that the town could implement to help them moving forward. That's not something on a state level coming down. That's, I think, something that the town should look into.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President, if I may interrupt, I just noticed and wanted to point out that our legislative colleague, Representative Serpa, is in fact in attendance online. I saw her name pop up, and I just wanted the folks to know that she was in fact in attendance.
Yes, I'm planning to have her introduce herself as soon as we finish the discussion with the school committee. So thank you very much. Okay, Mrs. Patno, we all set?
Yes, we're all set. I asked my members if they had any final comments, and we're good. So
okay,
please feel free to continue.
Thank you. I do note that Representative Serpa is on Zoom with us. So Representative Serpa, I would like you to introduce yourself, years in the legislature, areas of interest. Tell us about the area of Coventry you represent, the number of Coventry voters in your area, and tell us briefly about any legislative grants that you will be able to provide to Coventry organizations. So Representative Serpa, are you with us?
I am with you, and I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, for introducing me, and I apologize for not being there. I was stuck on Route 95 in traffic, so I decided to come home and Zoom in as quickly as I could. I do represent Coventry all around Lake Tioga. And Representative Chippendale, thank you for letting everyone know that I was there. I do represent Coventry west of Lake Tioga, all around Lake Tioga. I moved south to as far as, Senator Raptakis, you'll have to help me because you and I overlap there. But what I'm happy to announce is as I go up Route 3 with the new redistricting, I am absorbing a larger part of Coventry. I didn't have to move because my numbers, according to the redistricting officials, were correct because I used to represent West Warwick, Warwick, and Coventry, but because of everything that was happening around me, I had to get out of Warwick. So I am picking up more of Coventry, and this would be on the other side of Route 3. I think it is now presently covered by Representative Roberts.
Yep.
So
the Oak Haven section.
The Oak Haven, that's it. So I will be certainly getting in there to meet those folks before the next election. So I'm actually kind of excited about having just the two towns to represent. So I think that that's better. Having three is a lot, as those of you who have had it in the past. Lake Tioga is certainly important to me and to my constituents. I consistently, with Senator Raptakis, get them a grant every year for weed abatement, and I'm happy to assist with that. I'm presently working on a grant with Tioga School. There's a behavior program in place, and the teachers need some funding to provide the children with awards and rewards for accumulating a number of points. So I'm waiting for the final okay for that legislative grant. I think I've asked for $2,000 for that one. But honestly, I'm open to requests still. We still have some time to get our requests in. But in the spring, I know after the Lake Tioga folks take care of the weed abatement, I know that they asked for another grant. And honestly, Madam President, for anybody there, I'm still open to accepting some grant requests because certainly the requests have been very modest. So I'm open to that. And as always, I support the legislation that my fellow Coventry colleagues support. I've certainly signed on to a number of good bills. And I continue to be the chair of the Oversight Commission, and I'm holding the administration and the general officers accountable. I think if you all follow the news, you know that we certainly have a number of problems with the Department of Human Services, with DCYF, and along with my counterpart in the Senate, Senator Lou DePalma, we're certainly trying to hold people accountable. In the past several years that I understand did not happen until he and I became the chair people of our respective committees in our respective chambers. So I'm open to any questions from anyone.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move along with our agenda, but perhaps there will be questions for you in a few minutes. So thank you for joining us and
thank you.
Getting home so quickly so you could be on Zoom with us. So we appreciate your participation with us. Okay, we're going to move along to the bills of interest to the town councils. Senator Raptakis has asked us to discuss 4 of the bills that he has submitted. We're going to start off with Senate Bill 2180. This is relating to waters and navigation, inspection of dams and reservoirs, environmental study of Johnson's Pond. In your packet, it is on page 11. And I would also mention that the town council already has approved a resolution, which is in your packet, pages 22 to 23. So Senator Raptakis, I'd like you to just make some brief comments about the substance of this particular bill.
Sure, Madam President. It's the resolution you had passed originally, but what I did is I added West Warwick, and Cranston, and we've had support in the Senate side regarding those towns, because as you know, Johnson's Pond is a major ecological and recreational resource, and whatever happens upstream, it also affects downstream. So I think it's very important that DEM looks at this unique body of water that affects everybody, especially what has happened here in Johnson's Pond. It's become newsworthy throughout the state in the last 2 years. So I think following your lead, passing the resolution that you did, and that's the only difference with the resolution the town passed, is adding the other 3 communities, because it does affect whatever happens here. And we saw that during the tropical storm, that the amount of water that was released from the Johnson's Pond area by the current owners did affect West Warwick, Cranston, and Warwick.
Thank you very much for submitting this legislation. Are there any members of the council who would like to ask any questions of Senator Raptakis about Bill 2180?
Can you just clarify where this stands in the process again? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'm sorry.
Where is this in the pipeline, did you say?
The bill is in the Environment and Agricultural Committee, so probably the next 2 to 3 weeks, there should be a hearing on that bill. And what I would advise is that the Secretary of State has a website, and if you register with the Secretary of State's office, they would give you a shout out and let you know when exactly that bill is going to be heard. I'm not sure. I think my colleagues on the House, I think there is a companion bill from, I think, Representative Nardone regarding this particular bill. So the next 2 to 3 weeks, I believe there should be a hearing in that committee, and we'll advise. We'll let you know as quickly as we can. I know the other bill, before I think Senator Nardone wants to add comment. The other bill is being heard tomorrow. One of the other bills, I think 2220.
We'll get to that in a moment. Representative Nardone, comments?
Yeah, the bill that we passed the resolution for, that was to divert more funds to DEM. Is that correct, Lou? Yes, I did support that piece of legislation, and I am the sponsor on the House side. I think it's a reasonable request with the bacteria count that we inherited in Johnson's Pond this year. I think it needs to be looked into. So with that particular piece of legislation, I supported it as it is.
Thank you very much. Any other comments by members of the council on Bill 2180? All right, let us move on to Bill 2181. This is relating to water and navigation damages from mill dams, the Johnson's Pond Protection Act. Senator Raptakis, comments?
Yeah, both bills,
I'm sorry, excuse me. This is on reference pages 13 in your packet.
Okay. 2220, correct?
No, 2121.
They're both as almost identical. One allows DEM the authority to regulate the water levels, and the other bill is identical, but it allows the town of Coventry to regulate the water levels. Going back to what I said earlier, the issue here is, I think, what is going to happen, and both bills have been introduced. We're probably going to be looking at sub-A on these bills, because I think more in tune is not the penalty issue of the bills, but the environmental impact of what these what is happening on Johnson's Pond. And again, during an emergency, I think it's very important that you don't have untrained individuals to allow water levels to be dropped or empty out from that body of water, again, that could affect other communities downstream. But I think the environmental issue is very, very important. So as these bills are being heard, we're going to hear from a lot of witnesses, maybe even members of the community here in Coventry that are affected by this issue. I think it's very, very important that we start the discussion. Like I said earlier, for the last 2 years, this issue has been in the media, and probably many of us, not just in Coventry, statewide, are learning how important this body of water is to not just Coventry. And historically, it has been. Historically, we've had fishing, we've had swimming, we've had many, the Johnson's Pond fireworks, the ski show. So it not only affects Coventry, but on that aspect, many folks throughout the state. But again, the effects of what happens upstream and downstream also plays a vital role. So I'm hoping that both these bills are discussed at length. And maybe from the council also from others throughout the state. So I think both these bills start a very serious discussion of the future of Johnson's Pond.
Thank you so much in your interest in Johnson's Pond. Senate Bill 2181. Mr. Gorham, do you have any comments on this one, please?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the council with questions? Mrs. Shockley.
No, I just wanted to state that I think it's the environmental issue that really gets overlooked sometimes. Both the fact that this pond is now an ecosystem, and with the blue-green algae over the summer, some people hadn't heard about it. They were letting their dogs go in the water. God forbid they were letting their children. So making sure that at least as far as we can help it, we aren't allowing for that sort of thing to happen in, honestly, one of the most beautiful areas in the state, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Mrs. Shockley? I'm sorry, Ms. Ludwig?
Thank you, President Dixon. So Rep. Nardone and Senator Raptakis, I just want to thank you for your comments and your attempt to help us. The Johnson's Pond area and pond itself is a staple within this community. And it's absolutely horrifying to see the events coming from the gentleman sitting behind you. Thank you very much for your support. And I would like to talk about this possibly at an executive session next week for possible resolutions for us to support the bills from tonight's discussion.
Senator Raptakis, it's what we will be doing at another meeting of the town council is to look at possible resolutions or motions to support each of these bills on the part of the town council, but we will do it at another meeting.
Sure. Madam Chair, may I add something?
Yes.
Again, this is the first time both 2181 and 2220 are being heard publicly.
Yes.
I would just maybe allow a little bit of time because we do have these, if they're town bills, we have till the end of June to support it with a resolution, but probably earlier. But I'd like to get probably, and I'm consulting with my colleague, Representative Nardone, we want to put in front of you a good bill. It's going to be a sub-A. So before you pass a resolution, we'd like to offer you the probably good language that you can support. So it's going to be probably, I would say, sometime in April, if I'm going to look at how we do business up in the General Assembly, because I think these bills are very important. And I'd rather have you pass a resolution like we did on the first bill. Look at the language, have your legal counsel also look at the bills, the sub-As, and advise you how to proceed. So the timing is very, very important. I'd like to have the resolution now, but again, this bill's going to change. So I'd rather have you give us a resolution with probably a better product, a final product of what the legislation is going to look like.
Thank you for that advice to the town council. You're suggesting that we will.
Excuse me, may I jump in here? I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's important that I say what I have to say. I was asked to put in the companion legislation to these bills, and there were problems with the bill. And I collaborated with Senator Raptakis about the bill. I would definitely hold off on a resolution. There's two bills that are going in. I've had mine redrafted. I'm going to look at the language when I get back to the State House this week. I'm probably only going to be submitting one of those pieces of legislation after I read the draft. But I question the constitutionality of the bills. And I had spoken to the Speaker, and the Speaker, I think he used punitive legislation. Was that what he... So I've been collaborating with Lou. I talked to him about it, and that's, I think, why Lou is saying that, hold back a little bit, let it go to committee, let the committees look at it, and then proceed forward. Okay, it's just so.
We appreciate that advice, and we certainly will wait for you to be proactive in communicating with us when these bills are ready for us to discuss them at a council meeting and take some action if appropriate. Okay, so thank you so much. Representative Roberts.
Thank you. I would like to just add that whatever he decides upon, I will also be backing that up. So, and signing on to it in support. Okay.
Thank you so much. Any other questions by members of the council? Mrs. Lima.
I'm not sure how much you were working with the other Patuxent River municipalities. I know you mentioned, I see like maybe one or two of them involved, but I don't know if there's going to be an effort to get them educated on these pieces.
Well, most of us are going to be, it depends again on committee. Judiciary Committee is meeting tomorrow. So a lot of my colleagues are going to be looking at this legislation and be listening to testimony from many of the witnesses. And then also in the Environment Committee, there's, again, another group of legislators. But overall, I think there's an interest to try to resolve the issue. Because, look, if it happens here, it could happen in another community. So I think you're probably looking at also at probably a statewide bill. So there is a lot of interest. Again, a lot of legislators on the Senate side. As you can see, there's legislators from West Warwick.
Yeah.
Warwick, Cranston has also signed on to the bill. So,
yeah. I think Johnson's Pond is more than just a Coventry gem. Right. It's a state gem. Everybody knows somebody who's connected to it. So
absolutely.
Representative Nardone.
Yeah, Councilwoman Lima. I too, I'm going to be getting the delegation that represents the Patuxent Valley to sign on to this bill, but it has to be a bill that they're willing to sign on to. So it has to be drafted correctly, and that's how you get their signatures on it.
Yeah.
All right. So, but yes, I would
have been on the ground floor. So
absolutely, we've had input from the Patuxent Valley Commission.
Okay, thank you. And as Mrs. Shockley mentioned, this is an ecosystem that we're we're talking about is not just Johnson's Pond, but we're talking about a waterway that really is about 12 miles long, goes all the way out to Patuxent, the village of Patuxent and Warwick. So there's a lot at stake. So thank you. The next bill that Senator Raptakis has asked us to look at is 2208, and that is reference pages 16 to 18. Please give us a quick summary of that one, and then we'll tell you what's the status as far as the town council is concerned.
Yeah, Madam Chair, historically, this is probably the third bill that the General Assembly is going to pass, hopefully pass this year. And it's from
Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm sorry. If you'd like to make a comment, do you want to make a comment now before we get to this next bill?
No, I was just clearing up something on one of the pieces of legislation that I sponsored with Rep. Norrie, who signed on.
Okay, go ahead.
So basically, as you remember, the Auditor General had audited the Coventry sewer program and came up with several recommendations. The first two recommendations, the General Assembly, both House and Senate, have passed regarding interest rates, regarding asphalt costs. And this is the third bill, and this is identical to what the city of Warwick has done. So this increases from 20 years to 30 years the amount of time a sewer, a resident who is under the sewer charges has time to pay. I felt that Warwick came out with a very good program. There is low to moderate income households that they can pay their assessment a little bit longer. So that extra 10 years. Again, it's something that I'm bringing forth in front of you to discuss with the council. I think overall it's a good idea, giving folks a little more time. Look, mortgages are 30 years. The average of a household mortgage is 30 years. So by increasing it another 10 years from 20 or 30, I don't think it's going to hurt, but I think it helps those individuals that are struggling to pay their bills, and it gives them a little more time.
Thank you. We appreciate your interest in serving the residents. I believe that last year we did discuss this issue, and I think the town council was pretty strong in saying that it really wanted to manage its own affairs at the local level, if it's at all possible. So what's happened is that the sewer subcommittee has been charged with making recommendations for changes to our local ordinance, and the sewer subcommittee did present its recommendations to the town council. They were referred to the town manager, who has referred it to staff, and we are waiting for recommendations to come back from the town manager to the town council for deliberations. So we would like to proceed in that way first, before we would sign on to any other bill that would have state really, I guess you would say, take a stand on this. So we'd like to deal with this on a local level, and we're going to start in that way first.
Sure. I appreciate that, Madam President.
Okay, but keep tuned. We're moving along very quickly with many of these critical agenda items. Any other comments? Representative Morgan.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. In West Warwick, at one point, they did a similar thing that's envisioned in this bill, but it was a 20-year bond, and people were given 30 years to pay, and it created an enormous debt that was on the town then. That it wasn't easy to close, right? We actually had to have some supplemental taxes done to make up for all that. So people were paying for 30 years in something that the town was paying for in 20. So there was 10 years of payments that the town had to come up with, which meant that the residents had to come up with a supplemental tax bill to make up that difference. So unless you get a 30-year loan, this is not a good, it's not a good budgeting idea. And I understand that those people who are getting these sewers, it's a big item. We also had something like this in Warwick, and hopefully your sewer commission is really good, because in Warwick, they were able to just keep trimming and trimming and trimming the cost. They found ways to make it less expensive and less expensive so that the residents actually, I mean, it came down about 40% by the time that they put all kinds of savings into, it's an area of about 90 homes. So you might want to check with Warwick Sewer Commission and how they did it, because they were able to cut the cost down.
Excellent. Thank you. Senator Rogers?
The ARPA funds, the ARPA funds that are available is available for infrastructure, and it may not be specific for certain things, but some municipalities are using that money. You have an opportunity to use it on the sewer where you may have things already in play, but if you use that ARPA money, it relieves the stress and you can move that money to things that aren't ARPA qualified. That's what a lot of municipalities are doing. So you have that opportunity with the sewer issue to kind of correct the ship a little bit with the federal ARPA monies that are available, that weren't available several years ago until recently. So that's a godsend. So if you have, proper planning, you can free up things that you've already dedicated and funded source that qualify for ARPA and then use those funds in other areas.
Thank you. Representative Chippendale?
If I may, thank you. This was one of the things that the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council spoke about, where this would be the appropriate use of this sort of money, where it's being invested into something that's a hard asset that's going to benefit not just the residential, but also commercial and just the town in general. So what I've noticed some towns have done, and certainly we're late in the session, but I don't think too late, towns have been passing some resolutions with their arguments as to why they should be able to use some ARPA funds or have ARPA funds allocated for particular projects. It's something I would gently recommend that you have your council explore, perhaps putting a resolution in for that, sending it out and see what might fall out of the money tree.
Okay, thank you. Representative Nardone?
Yeah, I just want to touch base on what Senator Rogers is saying about the ARPA funds. I'm not sure if the ARPA funds can only be used for new projects going forward. And I don't know if the sewer, maybe Mr. Marchant would know that. So I'm not.
Mr. Marchant?
We don't have any current or past projects to worry about, so they will all be new projects going forward.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. LeBlanc?
Just a couple comments. I feel like this entire room knows that this is one topic that's very dear to my heart. Just a couple comments to Rep. Morgan. A couple things we have done. We've actually used the Waterman Fisk funds to help offset some of the sewer assessments. We've actually removed paving costs from the sewer assessments, which also is a significant cost reducer. We reduced the interest rate that the town was charging taxpayers from 6% down to I think it's 0.5%. So that's a significant savings. And we actually got the Auditor General to come into the town and actually do an audit, which I was told personally that's impossible. So I wanted to call out those couple of things that we have done to help the taxpayers of this town that are getting mandated sewer assessments. That are one resident on my street got a sewer assessment in the amount of $62,000. That should never happen ever. So that's one reason why I really got involved with the sewer finances. One recommendation to Senator Raptakis's legislation, it calls out a 1.25% interest rate. I actually think we should match the 201 sub A that was passed in 2019, which is 0.5%. I think that's too much interest, but I fully support that bill because it's actually recommendation number 11 on the Auditor General's review report from the sewer. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Representative Morgan?
Yeah, I think that's great that you have done, and I'm glad you have. I would really encourage you to talk to Warwick, though, because I think the assessment started at about 30,000 for every home. And I think they got it down to 17 or 18, which is a huge saving just on, and I don't know how they did it. I went to the meetings, but I don't remember what they did. But I just talked to them and see how they, squeezed the cost to get it down.
They certainly did. They got it down to like 16.5, but they like to say 16.5, but it's not really 16.5 because when you include interest, that brings it back up to 25 to 30. And then a homeowner actually has to connect their house to the sewer line, which is another $3,500 to $5,000. I mean, I can keep on going. So there's a lot of cost other than the sewer assessment. And a lot of towns like to just talk about the principal amount that the homeowner is going to have to pay, not with interest over 20 years.
Yeah, it's crushing. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. Mrs. Lima?
And we have also talked about, because obviously it's broadcast from RIPEC office about the ARPA funds, that it goes towards something like sewer. But one of the fundamental things that I struggle with is the way that our current ordinance is written. None of the savings from getting that federal money into new sewer is passed on to the resident based on our current formula. So it's only the town that gets to benefit from the savings of getting all this federal money and not the resident. So that's kind of the rub we have and something we're trying to work out with the ordinance and the formula for determining assessments.
Thank you, Mrs. Lima. Any other comments on this particular bill? So, Senator Raptakis, thank you so much for taking a great interest in our town and
Thank you,
submitting
Madam
this
Chair.
legislation. And I appreciate all the comments that all the rest of the representatives and Senator Rogers has made. We had a very healthy discussion. Not everyone agrees on every point of every bill, but it's good to see this is a democracy and everyone has a point of view. And this gives us time to deliberate and discuss.
In a safe democracy, Madam
Yes.
President, not what's happening regrettably in Ukraine.
Yes, thank you so much for that comment. I'd like to turn our attention to another bill of interest to the Town Council and the League of Cities and Towns. That's Rhode Island General Law 4452, Levy and Assessment of Local Taxes. I'd also like to welcome Jordan Day, who is an interim executive director of the League of Cities and Towns. Our town manager has invited Jordan Day to participate and to lend some comments. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Marchand to explain or discuss this bill and its impact on the town of Coventry and the amendment that we support. Mr. Marchand.
Thank you, Madam President. Even though I'm new here, I do believe this issue was raised last year during this meeting by my predecessor, Mr. Wazika. And what this proposal entails is right now we have a 4% cap on the growth of our levy each tax year. And when you have new economic development and investment in a community, the first year, whatever that investment is taxed at the current tax rate. But the following year, the cap of 4% rolls back all the value of that new tax base into the levy so that what happens is the town has less revenue to serve more need. And every economic development project in concept for not just Coventry, but every town and city in Rhode Island is diminishing the value of services to your existing residents in order to pay for the increased growth. Increased growth is not paying for itself because of the rollback on the taxes. And so what this proposal is saying is we'd like to eliminate the 4% cap for new growth in that first year. So that gets baked into the following year's levy assessment. Then the cities and towns can reap the benefit of those new tax dollars to fund services proportionate to that development. So it's a little bit of a difficult concept to understand from a taxation perspective, but we have Ms. Day from the League of Rhode Island Cities and Towns who has also taken up this issue as a legislative priority. Ms. Day, could you add anything to that?
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and thank you for allowing me to participate via Zoom. Super helpful, and I appreciate your time. I've been so eloquently stated, this is just another tool to allow cities and towns to manage their budgets and maintain or really decrease their overall tax rates for their residents. When it comes down to it, Rhode Island has the 8th highest property tax burden in the nation, and municipal officials have been working hard to stretch the local tax dollar and avoid large tax increases. But at the end of the day, we're still not there with the tools that we have in our toolbox. And so what we are seeking, and I'm more than happy to work with any of the legislators that are in the room tonight or members of the school committee or town council who are interested in this. What we're working towards is an amendment that would provide an exemption and further clarify that new growth category. Massachusetts had Proposition 2.5, which had a much more broad definition of what new growth is defined as. That includes properties with increased valuations due to development, exempting real property returned to the tax roll and new personal property, and a few other categories. We've sought that amendment to allow for that exception so that it could, as Mr. Marchant said, be applied to the levy, and then your levy would grow for the next year rather than reverting back to the old value. We're working with Representative Alzate from Pawtucket to get this sponsored in the House. We are still looking for a sponsor in the Senate. So if any one of the representatives is interested in co-sponsoring, feel free to reach out to Representative Alzate. But I am very eager to move something like this forward. It would provide a lot of community flexibility as we're looking at affordable housing developments and additional economic growth in all of our cities and towns.
Comments by members of the Rhode Island delegation? Senator Rogers?
Thank you. I'm a big supporter of Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns. They've helped us a lot. Sometimes I think they leave out the rural communities and way to the more urban ones. That's my only gripe with them. But I would be interested. The only problem is, as far as I know, the deadline for bills on the Senate side is Friday. And that means they're going to be down to legal counsel and written up and put in. So I don't know if they'll let some after that. They usually do on certain bills like this that, are pushed by certain entities with a little bit of clout. But I would be definitely interested in sponsoring that bill. And if you could call me tomorrow.
Absolutely, I can do that.
Because I'll be in session at 4. So early or in the afternoon, I would take up that conversation.
I'm happy to do that. And I have the legislation drafted already with a 1-pager on it. So I can send that to you. Absolutely.
That'll make it easy, and that'll definitely meet the Friday deadline.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Excellent. Other comments? Ms. Ludwig?
Thank you, President Dixon. So we did review this in last year's session with most of this audience. I think there was a little bit of confusion on what we were asking for. So just to be very clear, we are not asking for an increase of the actual levy. So if it would be helpful if we could give you some more examples or, meet with our counterpart here, that would be extremely helpful. But again, we are not asking for an increase of the max levy itself. Thank you.
Comments by other members of the delegation? Mrs. Shockley, comment?
I just wanted to say thank you for your support on this. I think kind of going to your comment on the fact that rural areas are sometimes left behind on these, I think it's the rural areas that could really benefit from this change. At least I know Coventry could. So I really appreciate your willingness to look into it.
And again, there was confusion last year, and I'll admit I was one of those. It's hard to wrap your mind around and understanding it, but it's a little bit clearer now that I've thought about it, and I kept relaying back to it last year and had a talk with a couple of finance directors where even to them it was confusing, but understood. And I'll make sure it's presented in that manner where it is in effect, because I wouldn't be for raising the 4% cap as a taxpayer myself, but I'll definitely help champion it this year through the League of Cities and Towns. And that will help a lot on their initiatives because they're pretty well forward on it.
So Senator Rogers, you have such a short time period here. I mean, you have other people who you believe will be able to come on this bill with you.
Yeah, it doesn't take one signature and get it in the hopper. So I'll get a couple real fast, and as long as I'll get it, if I can get it tomorrow in the afternoon, I'll have it sent down to legal counsel, and I can get it. My signature alone should beat the deadline just to at least get it in and work it from there. So
excellent. Senator Raptakis. Excuse me, Ms. Jordan.
Yes, I just wanted to say to Senator Rogers that I can send that to you tonight so you have it already. And I also just want to add that I think when we were thinking about this as a legislative priority for this year, rural communities were actually the main area of concern, as affordable housing development is one of the priorities this year and last year for the General Assembly, especially the Speaker and the Governor. Any major development will have an impact on your tax levy. And that was kind of the origin of this for a lot of folks. So I think that we're all on the same page, and I appreciate the feedback about our focus areas. And I'll keep that in mind in the future.
Thank you. Senator Raptakis?
Madam President, I was going to say that if this bill is only for the town of Coventry, then there is no deadline. If it's just specifically for the town of Coventry, but if it's a statewide bill, then again, what Senator Rogers said is correct. Statewide, then there's a possibility of getting that bill introduced. So.
Excellent. That's very good news to us, because last year, as was mentioned, there seemed to be a lot of confusion as to what we were actually proposing. And so we didn't get very far in the discussion. This time it sounds like there's real hope. So we appreciate Senator Rogers' willingness to move very, very quickly and get this in the hopper. So thank you so much. All right. Any other comments that members of the council would like to add about this particular bill or amendment to the bill? Okay, we're ready to move on to the next one. And this is Rhode Island General Law 24-15-5. On the Rhode Island, it should be DEM, being responsible for DOT, excuse me. Oh, it was changed. Being responsible for maintaining all sidewalks adjacent to highways. This is reference page 30. There's not much information on reference page 30, but we have with us this evening Mr. Kevin McGee, Director of the Department of Public Works. And Mr. McGee, I'd like to ask you to just speak a little bit about what this means to us in Coventry. So could you come over? Excuse me.
I have to hand out to everybody.
Okay, excellent. And then come to a microphone.
Hold on, call ahead.
But we want the public to hear you. I'm not sure if this coffee is deep.
Thank you, Mr. McGee, for such a thorough handout.
Well, you said you didn't have much, so I wanted to make sure you had something to look at. I've got a few comments that I've put together, and I'd like to go over them this evening. I'm encouraged to hear about everyone talking about reducing some of the burden on the taxpayers. This is exactly what this is about. In 2021, we met to introduce legislation on the Senate and House calendars, Rhode Island General Law 24-15-5, an act relating to highways and sidewalks. The bill states, require all maintenance of sidewalks along state highways to be the responsibility of the state. Work by RIDOT within the state right-of-way includes asphalt repair and pavement, drainage repair, pavement marking, street sweeping, and snow removal. RIDOT is also required to annually sweep the sidewalks within their right-of-way. Any work performed within the state right-of-way requires a physical alteration permit issued by RIDOT. If a city or town had to repair a sidewalk within the state right-of-way, a permit from the state would be required. 2 years ago, the director of RIDOT stated that his department had in excess of $550 million to run his department. The town of Coventry currently has less than 10% of that amount to provide asphalt patching, winter cold patching, minor asphalt repairs, minor sidewalk repairs. Definitely not sufficient enough to fund sidewalk repairs on state roads. The next thing I'm going to mention is the town council is not aware of this, or the town manager. This just came in this afternoon. The town paid for a pavement management study to be done by a company called StreetScan, which included sidewalks. The sidewalk entity just came in today. The town of Coventry, through this report, just received today, we will need to invest an amount of $35,448,341 to bring the town sidewalks to an acceptable good standard condition, referred to as an SCI, a sidewalk condition index for each sidewalk. $35,448,341 for town sidewalks, not the state sidewalks. The property owners are required to clear the snow from all sidewalks that border their property within 24 hours of a snow event. This requirement is per city and town ordinances. We are only requesting that RIDOT repair sidewalks within the state right of way, not clear the snow. I testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Housing and Municipal Government on April 14th of 2021 as it related to the Senate Bill 652, submitted by Senators Rogers and Raptakis. The RIDOT representative attempted to cloud the merit of this bill and the companion bill in the House as being too cost prohibitive for RIDOT. Let me ask you all one question. What rationale can be conveyed that RIDOT, with its funding capabilities, operating budget, federal grants, tolls, and gas taxes, can't afford to take care of their own infrastructure, but the cities and towns can't afford this with only property taxes? The courts, in reviewing and acting upon this very issue, had conflicting opinions. In 1931, citing Child versus Green, and in 1970, Barossa versus Pepin, the courts opined it appears to be well settled in the state that the liability of a municipality to keep its sidewalks safe is established by statute. The Rhode Island Department of Transportation is required only to annually sweep all sidewalks on all state highways, causeways, and bridges. However, in 1998, Rhode Island General Law 2551, Lincoln versus the state of Rhode Island, it had opined that municipalities themselves have a statutory duty to maintain at their expense all highways located within their borders and by extension sidewalks. This last contradictory opinion states that the cities and towns are responsible for all highways within their borders. Yet in Rhode Island General Law 2478, it refers to a state highway system, including the state highways. This legislature must act by statute to correct this onerous unfunded mandate placed on the local taxpayers and is placed under the jurisdiction of the state, as those sidewalks are owned by the state. It simply states that the state is responsible for repairs to sidewalks within the state right of way, and cities and towns are responsible to repair the sidewalks on municipal roadways. Please don't let RIDOT cloud the simple issue of their responsibility to maintain their own infrastructure by throwing high numbers around or claiming they don't have sufficient manpower. RIDOT has the ability to fund needed repairs on sidewalks within the state right of way through the resources they have for revenue, and the work should be contracted out, creating jobs and relieving the RIDOT workforce. The Rhode Island Interlocal Trust promulgated a report dated June 2008, Sidewalks, Myths, Laws, and Solutions, identifying the issue, which I passed out to everyone tonight. But nothing has been done for over 14 years to correct this inequity. This is the fourth year that I have raised this issue since 2019 to alleviate this burden upon the local taxpayers. I will continue to bring this issue to the forefront and bang my drum until the action is taken. Isn't it time to do the right thing as Coventry's representatives? Thank you very much.
Mr. McGee, would you please repeat the ask of the Rhode Island delegation relating to this topic?
The ask, ma'am, is to make the state responsible to repair sidewalks within the state right of way, and the cities and towns are responsible to repair the sidewalks on municipal roadways.
Comments from the members of the Rhode Island delegation?
Thank you. Last year, I believe, although he's been bringing up the issue for 4 years, last year was the first year the bill went in. It's been reintroduced again this year, and the bill number is 2341, and I believe Rep. Nardone has got the companion bill with it to be introduced on the House side. It was just introduced on my end on 2/15 of this year. So we're on that, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, and we're gonna beat that. Although my town doesn't have any sidewalks, they may in the future. Yep. Thank you very much.
I do, but I apologize. I don't have the number on the bill. But yes, and Kevin, I did would appreciate if you call into the committee when I do the hearing. I know the last time we lines crossed, so.
Testify for the Senate, but I didn't get through the House.
Yeah, it helps when I have people testify rather than me just sitting there presenting the bill on my own. But that would be a great help. Thanks.
Also, the Rhode Island Public Works Association is also supporting this.
Yeah, and I fully agree with the bill, and I wholeheartedly support it, and will campaign for it. Is the young lady from the League of Cities and Towns up there? Because it would be good if she if they write a support letter, I don't see.
She signed off, but I'll
All right.
call her tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Go ahead. So,
Mr. Gorham.
I just reviewed the bill submitted by Senator Rogers, and it would address the problem very directly. So that's second year with that bill. All right. Good luck.
Okay. Representative Norrie?
Just so you're aware, House Bill 7384, Nardone, Roberts, and Chippendale is Representative Nardone's bill number 7384.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate the three of you signing on to this bill. Any other comments?
And
Mrs. Lima?
It would just be great. This has kind of already been said, but if the council could be alerted when these committee hearings come up, that would be great.
Okay. So that way we can participate in any kind of hearings.
just be aware, if you want to do it remotely, you'd have to sign up, I believe. Is it 2 days in advance?
4 o'clock the day before.
Day before, so. But I'll try to make you aware of it, a few days beforehand. Okay.
But
2 days behind.
Yeah, and if I just may make a general comment, it's exceptionally cumbersome to try to not just keep track of the progress of every single bill that we have or that we're a part of, but then to also recall who it is we have to remind when the hearing's posted, because oftentimes in the course of business, we don't know we have a hearing until 2 days before, when our staff gives us the heads up that this hearing's been called. So there's a tool on the General Assembly website called the Bill Tracker.
Yes.
And a couple of other towns I represent, one of the members of the clerk's office just monitors those bills, and based on the progress of the bill is able to anticipate when it's going to be heard. Not to say that we won't make every effort to alert the council, but there's a high probability that we could miss. We're on the committee hearing dozens of bills an evening. We have our own bills in several committees. It's very, very difficult to try to remember all of that. So it may be a good partnership if you all track that on Bill Tracker.
We certainly will be proactive in doing that, but to reach the town council very easily, all you need to do is send an email to our town manager, and he can notify each of us. So that will be very expedient. So you don't have to remember everyone's email, but send it simply to the town manager.
Very good.
She could do that. Okay. A suggestion was made that perhaps our town clerk could help us out. So we'll look into that. Thank you very much. But a simple way is notify the town manager and he'll get through to each of us. Okay. And any other questions about this bill that Mr. McGee has discussed? Ms. Ludwig.
So, Mr. McGee or Director McGee, similar to our discussion last time, when we're ready, we'd like to consider a council resolution in support of this. And then also maybe we can get some of the surrounding communities as well notified and involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
That would be helpful. Anytime they're available to do that, that would be filed, and that's brought up, comes into this meeting, that there was a resolution supporting that.
Okay, thank you so much for that suggestion. Representative Morgan.
To me, this is just common sense. It really just is common sense. I can't believe it's coming up now in the year 2022. But if I think you make it more likely that the bill will be successful if you get other towns and cities to sign on. And I can't imagine any of them saying no to it. So in your position, I really would reach out to all of them. It just makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we're very fortunate because many of our senators and representatives actually do represent voters in 2 or 3 other communities around us. So that's a help. Senator Rogers.
What would be, I think, Rep. Morgan's talking about when you pass a resolution, something like this, you would want to send to all the communities, the 39 communities, and have them supported also.
Certainly.
I think what she was talking about.
Thank you very much. and we'll do that as expediently as possible. Any other questions, comments about this particular bill? All right, moving on, just a final comment, and I believe Mrs. Shockley brought this up, and that is, please consider any bills that adversely impact the town of Coventry with unfunded mandates. We've talked about this every single year. It affects both the school committee and the Coventry Public Schools plus the town of Coventry. And we do have a very serious problem when we have these unfunded mandates. So we just put that as a comment to end this particular meeting. Senator Rogers.
I didn't know when the opportunity for me to bring this bill up, but there is one that wasn't mentioned. It's not an unfunded, it's something every municipality should get behind. So Bill 2211, I've got the support from the League of the Department of Public Works Association, and every municipality and leader should get on top of this. It's much like we bring up Massachusetts many times, and we bring up the problems with capital funding. And again, we had the problem with the schools, and they made a law to put 3% on that. Well, the next hammer to hit the municipalities is your roads and infrastructure. So this bill would require funding that would be sent, much like your school education funding, to the municipalities like Massachusetts does for infrastructure on your roads and bridges. Important note, I don't know if you heard on the radio the other day, Director Alviti was on there, and he made a very important point that 100% of the roads in the state of Rhode Island, 20% are state, 80% are municipal. Now, that being said, the state does have the major arteries, but the state also pulls down from the tolls that they instituted. They also have the fuel gas tax that they have. And now over the next 4 years, you have about $500 million a year that are going to come into the state for the roads and bridges for repair. With the municipalities having 80% of that structure, we should be at the table and getting that. And I'm going to be having a meeting with Director Alviti, with the head of the Municipal DPW Association president, who's also the New England president, to have that conversation. And we're going to target some of them funds. And I'm going to throw it out there for $1 million a year for the next 4 years while we get a funding source in play that will fund that later. Simply, you don't want to take a source and create it without having an idea how to fill it in. 34 to 37% of the fuel tax goes to RIPTA. And I know many municipalities that I represent don't pay an absorbent amount of that because of the rural area we live. But for the town of Forster, we get 0 buses into the town of Forster, very limited in Situate and West Greenwich, and more so in Coventry. But we're funding that, and like to use the word, we're not getting an equitable return on that. So the things that we're going to target in this bill is that type of formula that takes that into play. If we're not going to get the money in the RIPTA, taking 40% of the fuel tax, you have to give us credit, much like the 40% on the free and reduced lunch program. We're paying it, we're not getting it back. So that's the long goal on getting this bill passed. But the front goal is to push to get it funded immediately with that infrastructure money that passed on a bipartisan level. So that's Bill 2211. Possibly getting some serious money in the municipalities to assist with your maintenance of your roads and repairs. And they do it in Massachusetts. So I need the League of Cities and Towns. I need every councilman, every state rep, and every state senator, because at the local level, we all represent our communities that we respectfully represent. And even the city of Providence will get $1 million. It won't go as far as it will out here, but that's a start.
So thank you for raising that issue. I just reiterate, keep us posted as to what we can do to help out. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Representative Nardone.
Since we're on the subject of mandates, I should let the council know that from here on out, they just passed a bill in the House mandating that if you want to sit on a planning board or the Historic Society, you do have to take a class. You are going to be mandated. So, it's something I objected to on the floor, and a lot of my colleagues voted against it. And I know we don't have a surplus of volunteers, but just be aware. If it goes through the Senate.
What kind of test are we talking about?
You would have to take an online course. I didn't read into the details, but some kind of educational program.
It's continuing ed. That
Sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay.
contract.
Is there a
All right.
cost to this course?
No.
Okay.
No, and most of them are being offered online and they're sort of canned, but yeah.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for raising that issue with us. Mrs. Shockley.
I wanted to, sorry, I'll just let you finish. I felt very teacherish right there.
There's a knocking at the door. Okay, Mrs. Shockley.
I just wanted to go back to Bill 2211 that you were referring to. Is there a way of making sure in the bill that the fact that they would be possibly giving us this extra money, they couldn't pull it from another pocket?
Say that again, just so I'm clear.
So sometimes the state says, we're going to give you this money, but really what they do is they say, but we're also going to take this money from you. So we end up getting the same amount of money, but now we're mandated to spend this money on the roads.
Well, again, every city and town has a problem, just like their schools maintaining their roads. And the source is going to be coming either from the tolls or the RIPTA cutting them back because they're not representing us. I'm kind of glad the infrastructure money's coming in because it allows us to get some funding on the point that 80% of the roads in the state are municipal. So that'll get that coming. But to continue that, this fund will help out. Again, the most important part in being a highway director, Kevin will agree, there's a certain point where you can't maintain your roads and they reach a point of repair that a simple solution becomes like, I explain it like a roof. You need a new roof, but you ignore it. Now, pretty soon you need not only a roof, but plywoods and sheetrock and everything because you let it go too far. And the same thing happens with the roads. So if we can get on board with this infrastructure money over the next several years, that'll put, even if this bill doesn't pass, that'll put us on a point where we can at least maintain it going forward. Because I know my municipality is behind on doing it. We also had the same study done through a different company to tell us where we're at. And it's important that you did that. And I pushed that through all my communities because with this money coming, if you're shovel ready and that plan is done, you're much easier to get the money up front because you're shovel ready with an engineered plan and set forward. And it sounds like you've already done that, and that's kudos.
Yeah. And I just don't want this bill to pass and have good intent and then not really be able to do what it wanted because other money gets scooped.
It's coming back to the municipalities, giving you control on fixing your roads. So you're all asking us to get you money, and this is part of getting you money.
100%. I want the money. I just want to make sure that I'm getting more money and not money that now has to be allocated just to my roads. You know what I'm saying? Same for the schools.
Okay, Senator Raptakis.
Madam Chair, before we go, before we wrap up the issue about the unfunded mandates, we got to be very careful. There is also legislation on elections that are probably going to be some sort of a mandate, especially there's one bill that has same day registration. So can you imagine the burden that's going to be on the board of canvassers? So you have somebody that can come in and register that same day. Our residence requirement in the state is 30 days. I can't understand why somebody would want a same day registration to vote. Also, the automatic mail ballots, which is not a good issue. I think it's going to put a burden on, again, hardship on our local board of canvassers. And then one of the other bills that I think we should be supporting is increasing the number of registered voters per polling place. I mean, consolidate. I think Coventry has 18 different polling places, 16 or 18 polling places. I mean, one is polling places like 2 streets away from each other. But that's a very important bill to try to regulate your cost. So there's a lot there in the hopper, especially in the election side. And I know we had a hearing a couple of weeks ago where even I believe your board of canvassers had sent letters. I know Cranston also took the lead on the increasing the polling places numbers because look, a lot of people are going to be voting early. They're not going to be voting on election day, 21 days, which is a good idea. At the same time, we got to be careful on some of these mandates when it comes down to elections.
Okay, thank you for raising. And if you could send those bill numbers to our town manager, then he can disseminate them to the members of the council so we can track those also. Thank you so much. Any other comments by members of the council or members of the school committee? Mr. Gorham.
just to address Member Shockley's concern, which is a very valid concern. It happens all the time. The way this bill is written by Senator Rogers, it's freestanding and it can't be bled into anything else. So it's a well-written bill, but it does always come down to the budget. That's where all the carnage takes place. But right now, this bill looks very good.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready to move on to public comment? Okay. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak? Please raise your hand, be recognized, and come and stand up and state your name and address. Yes. Would you get closer to a microphone, please? Thank you.
Mark Lamoy, 34 Island Drive, Coventry. I want to thank the state delegation for, all your support of our local community. There are a lot of many issues and seem to be addressing them all. And say thank you also to all the local reps for your service and time and efforts. Specifically regarding the Johnson's Pond issue, really want to thank Senator Raptakis for introducing the bills, Senator Nardone for co-sponsoring. Once the bills that go past Appendix A, is that the correct? Sub A, sorry. We really want to urge the council to support that. And it's right. It's the right thing to do for the community, for the environment, for the residents, the taxpayers, to correct this issue that we have in our community. Thanks again, and have a nice night.
Thank you, Mr. Lamoy, for your comments. Is there any other member of the public who is with us today who would like to speak? Yes, please come to a microphone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the public, and members of the council. My name is Patrick Doherty. I'm an attorney with offices at 887 Boston Neck Road in the town of Narragansett, and I am counsel to Social Holdings LLC. I've heard a lot. I've looked at the bills that were discussed here, and I just have a couple of comments to make in light of some of the comments that were said here this evening. Madam Chair, or Madam President, you hit the nail right on the head when you said in one of your comments earlier that this is a democracy. We are blessed with being in the United States of America, and we are blessed with having a constitution that protects the constitutional rights and civil rights of all Americans. These bills, you heard some things about unconstitutionality and punitive legislation. I've litigated cases successfully up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals on constitutional issues. These are some of the most patently unconstitutional bills I've ever seen. You are attempting, the General Assembly granted a franchise right to the Quidnick Reservoir Company, which was transferred to my clients. They purchased it for value and they paid for it. There's a tenet that's recognized by the United States Supreme Court, as well as the Rhode Island Supreme Court, that states that if legislation is introduced, which gives and grants a franchise right, that legislation must include something in it for an escape valve in the institution of it, or they cannot take that franchise right back without just compensation. So looking at these bills, I would hope, first off, that being in a contract with my clients as the successor lessor from Quidnick Reservoir to the town of the lessee, the town of Coventry, I would certainly hope that you would not support these bills as drafted and as requested at the present time, because it's the epitome of bad faith in a contractual relationship. You are asking the town or the legislature, the General Assembly, to enact bills to get you out of your contract and to take away my client's private property rights. We don't allow that in America. And I heard from the council table that referring to these gentlemen back here, I've heard a lot of negative implications. I heard something about the impact on the cities and towns in the South Branch of the Patuxent River that were impacted by my client's actions during one of the tropical storms that was forecast to be a hurricane. The impact on the city of Warwick, West Warwick, Coventry, and the other and Cranston was that there was zero flooding in the South Branch of the Patuxent River as a result of the prudent actions taken by my clients in anticipation of a storm that was forecast to dump 5 to 8 inches of rain in a very short period of time on the town of Coventry. Now, my clients, one of the things that I take exception to with regard to the discussions that were taking place and the negative implications placed upon my clients was that they have somehow acted untoward towards the members of the community and also in violation of whatever their contractual obligations. And I can tell you without reservation, my clients have never been fined $1. We have not been found to be in default of one contractual provision. We have not lost anything in court thus far. I don't know where the information is coming from. I see a lot of misinformation being placed out on there, but I've been at every proceeding. You've had 2 lawyers at every proceeding. They should probably be telling you exactly what's going on there. These bills in and of themselves put the onus and the burden on the taxpayers of the town of Coventry, as well as the taxpayers of the entire state of Rhode Island, in the event that they are passed for an inverse condemnation, a taking of property without just compensation. And I can tell you, if this property was worth so little in value, there would have been a condemnation by this time, but there hasn't been. That's because, as you said in your comments, members of the council, this is a very unique and a gem of a property and a body of water in the state of Rhode Island. But it was a man-made one. It was made in the 1800s based upon a grant of right from the General Assembly. It was a transferable grant of right. If we have been threatened with violations of the Freshwater Wetlands Act, if DEM thought that this was within the Freshwater Wetlands Act, you wouldn't have to have a bill that places it within the Freshwater Wetlands Act. And you wouldn't have a bill which goes ahead and singles out Johnson's Pond for a fine, a per diem fine that is 12 times the amount of the $5,000 fine for anyone else in the state. In addition to that, if you think that the legislation that states that the town of Coventry shall have the right to operate the gates and the water levels at the Johnson's Pond Dam is valid, you need to consult with a constitutional scholar, because this is the most patently invalid legislation I have ever seen. It violates constitutional rights. It puts an enormous potential financial burden on the taxpayers of the state of Rhode Island. And I don't see these, if these do pass, I look forward to being in federal district court. I look forward to testifying or not and speaking at the committee hearings on these matters.
Mr. Doherty, I did not set a limit on comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll
but
finish
that's okay. Maybe you could summarize, please.
Yes, I will. As I said, again, look at these areas of inquiry, the Sixth Amendment, the due process, look at punitive legislation, look at these buzzwords, do a little research, assign it to your solicitor, have him do some work on this. You'll find that this is probably one of the most ill-advised courses of action to take. We would love to talk about a resolution, but we would like to talk about a resolution of this matter in the context of truth and in the context of property rights and what is valid and what is constitutional, and not through some sham attempted taking through legislation. I thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Appreciate your comments. Is there any other member of the public who would like to make a comment? All set? All right. Is there any member on Zoom who would like to make a comment? Please raise your hand. Seeing none. I'd like to thank members of the Rhode Island delegation for all attending this evening. It was a very healthy discussion, lots of interesting comments. We're very happy to see what interest the delegation has for the town of Coventry. We appreciate your support. And I would also like to ask Chairperson Patno to please close your meeting.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting. I have 9:30.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 9:30.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0.
Thank you. Members of the council, may I have a motion to adjourn our meeting at 9:30? Thank you. May I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand. Aye. Okay, thank you. The motion is approved. We are adjourned. Thank you.